G'day folks, it's Campbell Mattinson here from Winefront. I've just finished tasting and reviewing the annual Penfolds wines, and I thought there was a bit of an interesting story there in kind of the way the wines are tasted, because I've been tasting the wines since 2002, and along the way things have kind of changed. How has it changed? Well, it's changed in the where and the how, as in the kind of physical where you taste the wines, whether you can taste them at home, whether you have the luxury of spending hours on each wine or tasting the wines over a couple of days, but also in the volume and in some ways even the order of the wines. Not that the wines are tasted in any sort of extraordinarily different order. I mean, they still start at Riesling, and no, they don't. They used to start at Riesling, which they now start at French Champagne, move through Riesling, move through Chardonnay, move to the international wines, and then slowly get through what we think of as the Penfolds range, almost starting in the past. Now, of course, this is no big deal, except that this year at the Penfolds Premium Tasting, Penfolds Bin 138, which we might think of as almost the start of the premium range, Penfolds Bin 138, the Grenache blend, was wine number 16 at the tasting, and because Penfolds reserved Bin A, there were two callbacks, i.e. it was poured 3 times because people weren't happy with previous pours. I was happy, for the record, I was happy with the first pour. I thought all 3 were slightly different, but they were different for temperature reasons rather than for the wine being a different wine under screw cap. Anyway, you hit bin 138, which you might think of as the start, at wine 19. And so instead of hitting it fresh, you've already gone through Bordeaux, Coonawarra blends, Napa blends, a new Chinese wine, Asterix as a new Chinese wine, all of which are quite seriously tannic. And so you're hitting the start of the range with a palate that I personally would describe as not ideal. Now, because of this, I decided this year that, you know, I go every year to this tasting, and it occurs to me that every year I hit Grange at wine number 30 or wine number 28 or, you know, whatever it is. And I think to myself, you know, the basic role of the wine reviewer is to tell people whether or not, I mean, it's not about us, and I'm not in the market for Grange. The basic role of the wine reviewer is to tell people whether they should spend their $1,000 a bottle and buy the latest release of whatever it is or whatever the price is. And so I decided that this year I would try to go to Grange when seeing there's so much writing on it, that I would get there with a fresher palate. So that was the plan. Of course, you can't do that because the wines aren't all poured when you sit down to start tasting. So, you know, they kind of get a read of the room as to where the bulk of people are at, and then pour the next few wines as you go along. So they're not sitting, there's not 25 wines or 28 wines sitting there from the start. Now, I know this, and the footage you're seeing overlaid in this video is both this year, last year, and the year before, I think. And so I know how it runs, and I shouldn't have had such a foolish plan. This is why, though, I look at my reviews of the Penfolds wines each year as the reviews that are as honest and accurate as I can possibly produce, but are also the reviews each year that I have the least... Confidence isn't quite the right word, because, you know, I'm in the fortunate position to have tasted pretty much every Penfolds wines ever made, because, you know, I was lucky enough to attend the Rewards of Patience tasting back in 2003 or 4, back when they used to do the whole Rewards of Patience tastings as one setting. I mean, not in one hit, but in one, 3 or 4 day hit, rather than sharing it around the world like they now do. And so, because I've got that kind of history, and every year I rock up and taste them, like I feel like I can see the Penfolds wines pretty clearly. But at the same time, because I can't taste them the way that I'd like to, and I can't, I mean, in my ideal world, I hit bin 707 and RWT and Grange in isolation and over time, and probably over the course of 24 hours. The Penfolds folks are really good and really accommodating, and they do everything that everyone wants them to do in the context of you have to go and do it their way. So whilst it's a well-run tasting, and whilst it's always emphasised that we can take our time, the clock is still kind of ticking. Like, you've got an hour and a half or whatever it is to get through your 28, 30 wines. There's no time to go, you know what, I feel like there's a bit of tannin build-up. I'm going to go and have lunch and come back and have a look at those top trio or half a dozen or 10 wines again, or I'm going to look at them the next day, or I'm going to come back 3 hours later. There's no doing it your way. And as a taster at home, where I do 99% of my tasting, I look at wines over a long period of time. I come back to them. I look at wines the way I look at my writing. I kind of re-edit my views. And because the Penfolds tasting is conducted as a set, here are the wines, and we're going to pour them as you go, and so keep up. I always feel, again, it's not a matter of confidence, it's not a matter of comfort, but I always feel like I'm not seeing these wines, or I'm not experiencing these wines on my terms as a reviewer and as a writer. And I find that the interesting thing about the Penfolds tasting each year, in that it sits outside normal practice. Now, it's this is kind of the point of the video, in that when I first started in wine, in fact, probably for the first 10 years, I mean, not when I started in wine, when I started writing about wine and reviewing wine, probably for the first 10 or so years, all of the Penfolds wines, there were tastings, yes, but they were actually sent to us. And so you might go to a tasting, but then you could go back home and look at the wines again. Now for me, that was position A. That is how I do my job properly. And we then, gradually moved to a more and more controlled way of tasting, or controlled as in Penfolds controlling it. And I don't think it's a Penfolds thing. I mean, I think that luxury brands around the world, and particularly luxury wine brands, and we're seeing a bit of a spat between Wine Spectator and First Growth Bordeaux as to how are the wines tasted. And personally, I think there's kind of an irony that is certainly not lost on me, and that is that there is one year that stands out of the past 10 years in terms of how the Penfolds reviews are conducted, and that, of course, is the COVID years. In the modern era, where Penfolds wines are no longer sent to reviewers, you need to go to them. There's the COVID year where that couldn't happen, and so the wines were actually sent, and I could taste them in my own way, in my own time, even at the temperature that the wines are served at. At the most recent Penfolds tasting event, was in the Barossa at the Kalimna Homestead. It was a freezing cold day, and personally, all of the red wines were too cold, or colder than what I would normally taste them at. Now, the irony is that I reckon I write reviews that I feel are more comfortably accurate. So I write better reviews if you send them to me, and B, I probably would give higher scores if you sent them to me, not because not as a thanks for sending them to me, but because I feel more that this is the way I go about it. If I'm tossing up between 95 and 96, or 90 and 91, or 98 and 99, or wherever you're at, or 85 and 84, if I'm tossing up, because of the way the tasting is structured and that I'm not at home, not doing it my way, I will always err on the lower side, because I feel a responsibility to readers. I feel if people are going to be paying their own money, and I'm not sure if it's this or that, and I know that I hit that wine with massive tannin build-up, then I'm always going to err on the side of a more conservative score, which, as I say, is the ultimate irony of the controlled Penfolds tasting. Now, interestingly, I mean, I'm not going to talk about individual wines and what I thought of them. All the reviews of every single wine is now on the Winefront site. Other than to say that I thought that Bin 389 was again another beauty. St Henri was again another beauty. I really like Bin 169. In the bus on the way home, some of my fellow wine writers didn't love the latest Grange. It's 2020, which is not necessarily the greatest of vintages. I thought it was actually a very good Grange. I mean, I hit it at wine number 27, which is wine number 30. It's like the AFL draft, 27 becomes 30. But I thought the latest Grange was really, really good. I thought the whites, as always, for me, they always steal the show. Anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting to discuss how the Penfolds wines are tasted at the time when the reviews are being published. I should actually say that the Chinese wine, which is CRT, I think it's 521. I remember looking at 521 and thinking it adds up to 8, which I don't know whether that was coincidence, but CRT, Chinese wine from 2 sites, I believe. It's the Cabernet blend, Cabernet something. It's a really good wine. I think it's a crying shame that it's not $45 so that we can all go out and buy it and experience it, and as in drink it on more than one occasion to really get a good grip of it, because it's an interesting wine. Penfolds has made a wine out of Chinese grapes only from 2 separate sites. And because of the vastness of China, these 2 separate sites, I think they said they're 2,000 or 3,000 kilometres apart, like some extraordinary distance apart. They're one of these sites is definitely at altitude, a lot of daylight hours, but cool. It's ripening Cabernet. These 2, one's got a bit more flesh, one's got a bit more structure. It's a very Penfolds wine, but it's a really interesting wine. In fact, it was not necessarily in point score, but in terms of enjoyment, it was one of the wines of the tasting for me, and it's 100% Chinese grapes. I mean, I just think that's a fascinating moment in history, whether you like the idea of Penfolds' expansion into new territories and old territories, and I mean, non-Australian territories. And I just think it's an interesting moment. But anyway, apart from wanting to share a bit of footage from tastings that I've gathered, I just thought it might be interesting to actually see how they're tasted and the scope of the tasting. I mean, I don't think anyone really necessarily sits down and thinks. I think if you asked somebody how many wines would be at the Penfolds new released premium tasting, you might say, oh yeah, a dozen, but it's 28 wines at the tasting, which all need to be tasted in a set amount of time. So there you go. Anyway, thanks for your time. Cheers.